Hello, welcome to Gurukul's Cat 100 series, a series that's designed specifically to take you from your study room to the corporate boardroom. I am Prady Sharma and this is Verbal Mastery with Prady. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today is again the 5th day, so we've done 4 passages. Now today is the day we do verbal ability. So I've gotten 5 nice sets for you if you want to take this up as a test. All you've got to do is go on to www.gurukul.org.in. Okay, now you'll see a login button. This is where you log into the 100 days to cat, but in case you're a first time user, then what you've got to do is go on to the sign up button after you click the login and sign up for 100 days to cat test series. Now this is a completely free test series for all of you where you can practice your quant, LRDI and verbal ability every single day for the next 100 days. It's 100 days, 100 tests, 100% free, so that you can stay consistent with your cat prep and make sure that you can crack cat 2025 in your first attempt. So without any further ado, let's get into the questions. Now this is your question number 1. Please solve this question and then we'll go on to the second question. This is your question number 2. Pause the video, solve this question, then we'll move on to the third question. This is question number 3. Pause this video, solve this question, then we'll move on to the fourth question. This is question number 4. Pause this video, solve this question, then we'll move on to the last question. This is your question number 5. Pause this video, solve this question, and then we'll get into the explanations of all these questions. The first question is a para summary. It reads, to me, a classic means precisely the opposite of what my predecessors understood. A work is classic by reason of resistance to contemporaneity. So basically, he's trying to tell us what does a classic mean to him, right? So here, his definition, a work is classical because of its resistance to contemporaneity and supposed universality. So it should resist both of these. Okay, by reason of its capacity to indicate human particularity. So it should indicate certain kind of human particularity and a difference in the past epoch. So it should talk about, the particular era that it actually belongs to. The classic is not what tells me about shared human history. So again, he's telling what is it not. It's not what it tells about shared human history, or more truthfully put, what lets me recognize myself as already in the past. What nourishes me in the illusion. So what is it? It is something that nourishes him in the illusion, like everything has been, like it has already been and he has existed only to prepare this way for me. That's not what he wants. Okay. Instead, so this part is not what he wants. Okay. This is his definition. Now, extension of that definition is given over here from this instead. So this is the extension of that definition. Instead, the classic is what gives access to radically different forms of human consciousness for any given generation of readers and thereby expands for them range of possibilities of what it means to be a human being. So very, very beautifully written thing. So what he wants is something radically different, okay, so that it could imbibe new forms of human consciousness for any generation of readers. No matter when they're reading, they should feel it as a new thing. Okay, so what do I understand from all of this? I can understand that the author, okay, wants a classic which resists modernity, okay, must belong to a previous generation, very simply put, okay, must belong to a previous generation. And what else? It should have some kind of particularity. Yes, so these are the things that he's looking for. Also, it should evoke human consciousness. So this is another important condition that he has put. So these are the 4 things that the author wants in the particular term or in something that he would consider as a classic. Now let's look at all the first statement. A classic is able to focus on the contemporary human condition and a unified experience of human consciousness. Clearly, the author does not want a unified experience of human consciousness, right? So this is an opposite choice as compared to what we actually need. So I'm going to remove this. A classic work seeks to resist particularity. Again, guys, we need particularity, but if it's resisting particularity, then it's just giving into everything, right? It's giving into something that is unified or universal. So obviously it should not be B. We don't need to go further at all. This opposite, we can just mark it out. A classic is a work exploring the new going beyond the universal. So here exactly what we want, it's coming out, because we need the classic to be new to the users. It needs to be new no matter when they are reading it. It's definitely going beyond the universal, no, nothing unified. So he just wants it to go beyond the universal and the notion of unified human consciousness, and it gives some radically different form of unified human consciousness. So this could be a possible answer for us. Now let's look at 4. A classic is a work that provides access to universal experience of the human race as opposed to radically different forms of human consciousness. No, but we want access to radically different forms of human consciousness, right? So this again becomes the opposite of what we were trying to get. So this should not be our answer. The best possible answer for us becomes C. Now let's move forward. Now this is a para jumble. Let's see what this has to say. Man has used poisons for assassination purpose ever since the dawn of civilization, the starting of the civilization, against individual enemies but also against armies. So it could be a small scale or a big scale. Great. This looks broad enough. This looks broad enough. Okay, but if we get a broader, ambit over here in any of these sentences, we'll go for that as a starting statement. These damages were soon recognized and resulted in 2 international declarations. My first question that comes out here is, which damages are we talking about? Okay, in 1874 in Brussels and in 1899 in The Hague, that prohibited the use of poisoned weapons. Okay, so some sort of poisoned weapons need to be talked about before we go into this second statement. Here, the foundation of microbiology by Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch offered new prospects for those interested in biological weapons. So here this poisoned weapons could mean biological weapons. So this statement 3 should definitely come before 2 because it allowed agents to be chosen and designed on a rational basis. Okay, fair enough. Now that we understand that this is happening, probably that is why these dangers were recognized and we are getting these 2 kind of international treaties. What are those dangers? The dangers are the designing by choosing and designing different agents as biological weapons. Now let's look at 4th one. Though treaties were all made in good faith. Now these are the treaties that we are talking about, and in this statement he says that though treaties were all made in good faith. That means definitely I should get 4 after 2. And what do I understand from 3 and 2? I understand that 3 should come before 2. So definitely 3, 2, 4 is one order. Now, if you look at this seems like this all at a different, tangent altogether. But this using poison for assassination, okay, this kind of sets a precedent onto biological weapons. This kind of sets the historical perspective of biological weapons. And that is why your first statement must come at the start. So the right option will be 1, 3, 2 and 4. Now let's go to the third question. Now again over here they say a translator of literary works need to secure hold upon 2 languages involved, supported by a good measure of familiarity with the 2 cultures. So whatever the 2 languages you are translating from, so let's say that you're translating from Hindi to English, you should know about both these languages, both grammatically, vocabulary wise, and also you should be involved with the 2 cultures. For an Indian translating works in an Indian language into English, that means from Indian languages to English, okay, finding satisfactory equivalents in a generalized Western culture of practice and symbols in the original would be less difficult than gaining fluent control of contemporary English. That means what? They can very easily find out about what are the parallels in culture, okay, what are the symbols and all that they would like to use culturally as far as the English or English speaking cultures are concerned, than to gain knowledge or complete control of contemporary English. Contemporary English means modern English. Okay. But when a Westerner works on texts in Indian languages, the interpretation of cultural elements will be the major challenge rather than the control over grammar and essential vocabulary of the language concerned. So, if a Westerner is working on English, translating Indian texts of Indian language into English, then the major problem would be understanding the cultural elements. It's not about understanding the grammar and essential vocabulary of the Indian language in itself. It is much easier to remedy lapses in language in a text translated into English than flaws of content. So what's he saying? It is whatever grammatical mistakes and all are there, that is easier to correct once the thing has been translated into English. But the content in itself cannot be corrected so easily. Since it's easier for an Indian to learn English language than it is for a Briton or American to comprehend Indian culture, translations of Indian texts is better left to Indians. So what does that mean now? Since an Indian person can learn English language easily, rather than someone who's American or someone who's from Britain learn the entire cultural aspects of Indians. That is why any Indian translations into English should be left to the Indians themselves. Now let's look at the option. Option 1 says while translating, the Indian and Westerner face the same challenges, but they have different skill profiles, and the former has an advantage. That means Indian has the advantage. So over here, again, it's not the same challenges, to be honest, right? So it's easier for the Indian person to understand the culture and all in the America, but it's hard, it's a little difficult for them to learn the English language. So this should not be our correct answer. As preserving cultural meanings is the essence of literary translations, Indians' knowledge of the local culture outweighs the initial disadvantage of lower fluency in English. Great. So this is almost correct. This is a desirable answer, although I feel that it's a little partial in scope, that it's not directly telling that yes, Indians should be the ones translating, but we can keep this as a good answer. If we do not find anything else, we'll go with this. 3. Indian translators should translate Indian text into English, as their work is less likely to pose cultural problems which are harder to address than the quality of language. So this accurately summarizes more aspects of what is being told in the paragraph. So now 2 can be rejected as a partially scoped choice, and 3 is our better answer. Now let's look at option number 4. Westerners might be good at gaining reasonable fluency in new languages, but as the understanding of culture reflected in literature is crucial, Indians remain better placed. Again, this is also a good answer, but the problem is it only looks at the Westerners' perspective and then concludes about the Indians. Whereas over here, Indian translator translate Indian text into English as the work is less likely. So it's talking about the work, okay, and not the Westerners. So for us still, the better answer is 3. So that should be the right answer. Since here we are talking about the work that is being done by people, and here we are talking about the people in themselves. Over the whole paragraph, okay, we see that the work is what's being focused on. So let's go to the 4th question. Now, I mean, there's simply too much information for your brain to fully process everything. Now, this is broad enough for me. Okay, so unless I find something more broad, okay, I'm going to take one as my first sentence. Now what is happening over here? He's actually telling that there are too many changes that go on around you and you are not able to process everything. Even if you notice everything, your brain is not able to process everything. Now 2 says, psychologists use the term change blindness to describe this tendency of people to be blind to changes they are in the immediate environment. So psychologists are talking about this term change blindness, and they're describing that change blindness as something where people are not able to visualize all the changes though they are happening in the immediate environment. Fair enough. So B, or second statement, is definitely not more broader than the first statement. Third one, it cannot be aware of every single thing that happens in the world around you. Okay, fair enough. Now what is that it? Either it should be you cannot be aware of every single thing, because then it will be talking about you, or psychologists, so it should be saying they. But when it's saying it, the it part is either going to be your brain or something in 4. We've not seen 4 yet. So let's look at 4. Sometimes big shifts happen in front of your eyes and you are not at all aware of these changes. Fair enough. Now, definitely this it cannot be anything over here. So I can clearly link this 3 with your brain. Now look at this. It cannot be aware of every single thing that happens in the world around you. Okay. Now, every single thing that happens around you, and sometimes big shifts happens right in front of your eyes. These two things, to be honest, go right together. Correct. So I can see that 1 is the most broad aspect. Then comes 3, which is directly continuing it. And 4 talks about something that is happening right in front of your eyes, but you're not at all aware of those changes, which is an extension to the idea that's presented in 3. Okay, now if you look at 2, psychologists use the term change blindness to describe this tendency of people. Okay, so this tendency of people, which tendency of being blind to the changes that are in their immediate environment, which is already been talked about in the 4th. So the correct order should be 1, 3, 4 and 2. Now let's go to the last question of this passage. For each of the past 3 years, temperatures have hit peaks not seen since the birth of meteorology, and probably not for more than 1,10,000 years. For each of the past 3 years, temperatures have hit peaks not seen since the birth of meteorology, and probably not for more than 1,10,000 years. The amount of carbon dioxide in the air is at its highest level in 4 million years. This does not cause storms like Harvey. There have always been storms and hurricanes along the Gulf of Mexico, but it makes them better and more powerful. Okay, so basically till here, what do I understand? I understand that temperatures have been rising. Okay, and because of these temperatures rising, one other thing that I see is that the carbon dioxide level is at its all-time high. Okay, but he's saying that this is not a direct cause, okay, for hurricanes. This is not the direct cause for hurricanes, but okay, it makes these hurricanes more wetter and powerful. Okay, so that's what's happening. As the sea swarm, they evaporate more easily and provide energy to storm fronts. As the air above them warms, it holds more water vapor. For every half a degree Celsius in warming, there's about 3% increase in atmospheric moisture content. Then comes the explanation of why they make it more wetter. Okay, so then there's an explanation. Right, scientists call this Clausius-Clapeyron equation. This means that the skies fill more quickly and have more to dump. The storm surge was greater because sea levels have risen. So again, he's giving now the example. Okay, he's now telling the exact reason why these were so, destructive. The storm surge was greater because sea levels have risen 20 centimeters and as a result of more than 100 years of human-related global warming, which has melted glaciers and thermally expanded the volume of seawater. So this explanation and reasoning is provided at the end, right? So which of the options actually have all of these points covered? That's what we've got to look at. So the storm Harvey is one of the regular annual ones from the Gulf of Mexico. Global warming and Harvey are unrelated phenomenon. Okay, now see, the storm Harvey is not a regular one. There are storms like Harvey that keep on happening, but it's not Harvey itself. So we can take off one. Global warming does not breed storms, but makes them more destructive. The Clausius-Clapeyron equation, though it predicts potential increase in the atmospheric moisture content, cannot predict the scale of, damage storms might wreak. Fair enough. We are saying that global warming does not breed storms. That's all great, but it makes them more destructive. That's great. Okay. Now about this equation, though it predicts the potential increase in atmospheric content, it cannot predict the scale of damage the storms might wreak. Now that is not what we're talking about at all, right? See, we are talking about how, there has been global warming that has caused, glaciers to, melt, and those glaciers melting expanded volume of seawater. So all of this is coming, and this seems somewhat like a partial scope choice. Okay. Now, if I do not find another better answer than 2, I will definitely take 2 as my answer because it does convey, this option actually conveys the ideas in the right tone, but not all the ideas are mentioned. So let's look at 3. Global warming melts glaciers, resulting in seawater volume expansion. Great. This enables more water vapor to fill the air above faster. Thus, modern storms contain more destructive energy. So this again, although it does not mention direct names like Clausius-Clapeyron equation and all, this is actually the explanation and reasoning why these things are happening. So better than 2, I will go for 3. So this 2 is nothing but a partial scope choice for us. Now 4, it's naive to think that rising sea levels and the force of tropical storms are unrelated. Harvey was destructive as global warming has armed it with more moisture content, but this may not be true of all storms. Now again, he's saying that this is true of all storms in the passage. He's saying that it's not only Harvey that's got equipped, it's all the storms that are getting wetter and more powerful. So this is definitely not going to be my answer. The best possible answer for me is going to be C. Now with that, we come to the end of this video. In case you stayed till here, please drop that like because that motivates us a lot to keep making such videos for you. Share this with one of your friends who is definitely preparing. Share this with that friend who is eternally confused about CAT prep and is not able to find the right resources to prepare. This is a completely free resource for all of you. So spread this like wildfire. I will see you in the next video.
Hope you enjoyed learning from today's session.
This series is designed to help you with your CAT preparation and practice daily. We are with you in this journey.
To watch the next video, click here. And to watch Gurukul's CAT 100 series, study room to boardroom, the entire playlist, click here.
If you learned from today's session, like, share, and subscribe.